Hello, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of The Mystic and the Dreamer with Peter and Priscilla. We're going to dive in to astrology here in this episode. And I have to say, I'm not the astrologer of this group. Peter is. So he's definitely going to give us what we're going to talk about today is more to do with the sun and the moon and the personal horoscope and the aspects of that. He's going to actually go through a little bit of that for the people that are like me that don't know much about astrology that way. This is actually a good intro into this. But before we start, I'm actually very curious, Peter, how did astrology come about in your world?
Well, it started when I was 30 years old and I had a huge crisis. And that was the crisis that actually led me into spirituality and into an understanding of the unseen world. So when you're in a crisis, you always try to understand yourself and the world. And I had a friend who'd been to an astrologer and was very impressed by the reading. So I said, and actually to my own huge surprise, I said, God, I want to try that. I went to the astrologer. He did my horoscope. I'm Gemini, and I had studied all the signs. And the only thing I pretty much knew was there was a thing called the ascendant as well. That's important. And I had decided that I had to be Sagittarius. Knew nothing about astrology. And then I came in and I was shocked to hear I was Scorpio rising, meaning that my personality was shaped by the sign of Scorpio, very emotional and sometimes very closed off. And what happened was that the astrologer was so good, I was shocked. He saw all my weaknesses, all my strengths, and I walked out deeply, deeply impressed. And I decided I wanted to become an astrologer. That very moment I walked out. 1 week later,
Wow.
I started
That's a big impression.
on a course to become an astrologer. And this was totally destiny because I went straight down to a bookstore, grabbed a book, and on the book it said they had an astrology school. That astrology school was 1 mile away from where I lived in Copenhagen, and they started new courses 2 weeks later.
Oh, wow.
So that's how it started, and it was a strange experience for me because I studied it for 2 years, and then after 2 years, I did really well to some talks, and suddenly I found myself being invited to international astrology conferences, like in Norway and Denmark especially. And people were kind of listening to me as if I was some kind of expert. And I was almost saying, no, I'm a beginner. I started 2 years ago. And then I became a professional astrologer 2.5 years later. That's the time where I figured, okay, I guess maybe I am a professional astrologer. I had also taken 2 years of school. So I started and I did that for 10 years and then I got tired of it. Today I just do it now and then for friends. I don't want to do it for I do like 10 horoscopes a year.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think astrology is such an important part of a person's, how do I say this? It's like when somebody wants to search more about themselves and their personality and maybe what's going on in their life, astrology really definitely is a guiding post. It's a map, and even I was impressed. I do divination and I do oracle cards and tarot card readings, and it's almost the same thing, but obviously not the same thing. Meaning it's just a map, a guidance of a person's personality and or some say soul. So it's interesting how I can honestly say, even when you helped me with my own chart, it has definitely, and you still continue to do so. But I'm just saying, it has helped me realize.
And at that time I didn't know you. That was actually almost the first thing we did, which is important because I seriously think you are better astrologer when you don't know people. Contrary to what people think, it's easier to do it when you know nothing about a person. And I agree with what Scylla said. I see the horoscope as having two strengths. First of all, it's a map of the soul, meaning it has to do with your personal development and your spiritual pathway. And I think that by far is the most important. The other part of astrology is the one that is more known, and that is simply as a calendar. What is going to happen in your life the next 2 years? And I always say the next 2 years because it doesn't make sense to do a horoscope and tell people what's going to happen to them in 2026. We make choices all the time. We have a free will to destroy our own lives or better them, hopefully making them better. So it's incredibly important to see astrology as a guide that can tell you about the climate of the next 2 years of your life. Is it winter in your relationship? Is it summer or spring concerning your job? Is this a good time to go out there and try to find a lover? Or is your whole horoscope screaming, no, you need to work on yourself before you do that? Or is it good for you to drop your job and start another one? Sometimes that's an awful idea. You can still do it, but don't expect things to go very well. So I think it's important to point out also that you cannot really, contrary to what people would like to think, you can't necessarily see exactly what's going to happen in a person's life. But you can see the energy. You can see, is this a time for reflection, for being quiet, for staying at home, for working on yourself? Or is this a time to go out there and get a new job, make an impression, and take a lot of initiatives?
Yeah, but that's where I can relate a lot to astrology, because that's
Sure.
also exactly one of those things that when I look at a person's, intuitive reading, that's exactly what I'm doing as
Yeah.
well. I'm taking the spiritual forecast or the
Yeah.
weather energy pattern of what's going on with their lives. So, like I said, I think this is a very good way for people to really get to know themselves and what's been going on, personal development. Absolutely.
Sure. And that is actually the number one thing. Scylla and I have one thing in common. Scylla is very good with the cards. He does a lot of card readings, and both of us are incredibly tired of people who only want to know, when am I going to meet the love of my life? or, when will I get that job? There's nothing wrong with that. Career and love are incredibly important. But I do think that both astrology and divination with cards have much more to do with, is better served, or you are better served to use and go that way if you are interested in you as a soul. If you're interested in developing yourself and becoming a better human being and have a better contact to whatever you want to call it, your guides, your angels, God, whatever you want to call it.
So what exactly what are you going to talk to us about here? What aspect and...
Sure. I want to start by saying one thing. Ever since I started as an astrologer, and that was in 1988, 1989, I've been incredibly irritated by sun sign astrology. I think that is the worst enemy of astrology. When you think that there only are 12 types in the world, when you seriously think and even brag, I've heard astrologers brag, that they can always tell which sun sign people are. That is absolutely bullshit. Because the signs don't necessarily describe your personality. Now, you would think that if you read the Astrology and Reader's Digest or you read the very simple astrology, then you would think of the 12 signs as 12 types. But what the sun sign describes, to my mind, without a doubt, is how are you gonna be happy? What is it that drives you? So in a certain sense, the sun sign, meaning the sign you're born under, is incredibly important. It is the most important information in your personal horoscope, but it's only one piece of information. But it is important because we all want to be happy. And the sun shows where you can shine. Now, to make this a little more advanced, I have then included the moon, because you also have a moon sign. Now, I cannot tell you where your moon sign is, because that depends on the day and the moment you are born and where you are born. But the moon sign then shows something else, and that is, to my mind, actually as important as the ascendant. The ascendant being the personality. And we're going to forget about that in this context. We're going to stay with the sun and the moon. The moon shows your emotional needs. Your emotional needs, where you're coming from, what kind of environment you are, what kind of environment where you thrive, and actually, most important of all, when you are not on the top of your game, when things are not going well, what gives you security? Your moon sign. Where your moon are in the horoscope, in what house, what aspects. So the moon has to do with our past. The sun has to do with our future. We are moving towards the sun, meaning the sign we are born in, which is exactly why that at least 50% of the people on this planet don't really express their sun sign. And that is so important to say. So please, 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 please stop guessing people's sun sign. Please don't become an awful amateur astrologer who thinks you know someone's sun sign because you've been with them for half an hour. What's really irritating is that everybody guesses my sun sign, which I find hilarious because I actually express that. But I'm not that sun sign, and none of you are either.
Well, yeah, you're not just one small facet of, the 12 zodiac signs.
Yeah,
I mean, you can't.
Exactly.
But so just so the listeners know, there are a lot of internet resources as well that you can actually get your chart, meaning, as long as you have the accurate birth time, that's probably be the best inclination to get this done online, where you can actually see where your moon will be. There are a lot of charts now you can do online, actually, but obviously they're going to ask you for the exact
You can
time.
go to astro.com and go to that link that has to do with, obviously, with personal horoscopes. And then you can put in all your info and you can see your horoscope and you can see where your moon is if you're interested in that.
And it's obviously free, so please don't pay for anything online. I'm just saying there is way you can do it online to find out what your sign is.
And also, by the way, it's very important for me to say I'm not doing this to get clients. I don't want you as a client. I'm not taking any clients. I just think this is fun, and I also think that astrology is something that helped people immensely. I mean, I have helped, hopefully, it seems like that, almost 1,000 people by doing charts through the times, and I mean, it's an incredibly great gateway into your soul. And do understand, we are talking a very simple astrology today. We are not talking about your individual chart because I don't know what that is. I don't know your birth time. So again, to repeat, there are 12 sun signs, but when you combine your sun sign with your moon sign, at least we are talking about an astrology that is somewhat more complex, because now we have 144 so-called types in the world, because 12 sun signs and 12 moon signs. So maybe we should get going with that. So the first sign of the zodiac is obviously Aries. And so you meet someone who's in Aries, and what is the only thing you can be sure about that person? That is, I would argue, and most astrologers would agree, that this is a person. In order to be happy, she or he needs to be active, assertive, and if they are not active or assertive, they are probably not very happy. So you can meet an Aries who's none of that, who is not competitive, who doesn't want to be number one, who is a couch potato, who never takes any initiatives. And if I now want to generalize, then I would say that this person is probably not very fulfilled. Because if you're born under the sign of Aries, in order to express yourself, you have, again, to be assertive, you have to be active, and you have to, actually in a certain sense, you have a permission to be a tiny bit egotistical. So you could argue that if you were born under a sign called Libra, it's actually not very good for you to be egotistical. But what people get wrong is that you have as many egotistical maniacs in Libra and in any other sign than you do in Aries. So you have a lot of qualities that you would connect with Aries, and you can read about them in any magazine. It's people who are impatient. It's people who like to fight a lot. Since it's a so-called fire sign that has to do with being active and assertive, two words I've used quite a bit now, they are people who usually like drama. And if life is boring, they will create that drama. And this is just a very short introduction to this sign, who obviously also is very independent. It's also a sign for being independent. It always hurts you a little if you see someone born in the sign of Aries who is like totally under the thumb of someone else. That is not healthy. And that doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman or even a kid. You have to have your way. And you also have to learn that you cannot have your way all the time. Now, if we go to the moon sign, and again, you don't know that unless you've had your astrology, your personal horoscope checked. But if we go to the moon in Aries, that means something different, actually. That means that when you are down, because the moon sign is interesting, it shows how you find security in life. And since all of us will experience life as difficult at times, that is the time where we like to go home. Some of you will know that the moon also represents the mother and our childhood. So as we all know, when things don't go our way, when we are ill, we actually often return to the mother. You can see that as a symbol, obviously, not physically to your mother. So someone with the moon in Aries is someone who needs a house that's active, that actually needs to do a lot. So if you're depressed and you're Aries, you actually need to be active. Where some people need to withdraw into themselves, a person that's born with the moon in Aries is actually someone who needs to act out their needs. Not be quiet, not stay with them inside. Sometimes those are the things we hear from therapists. But I would argue that anyone who has a moon in the Aries actually needs to go out and learn karate or need to do something violent that doesn't hurt anyone else.
Violent.
The last thing was important.
I know, don't hurt me.
Violence that, and I obviously don't mean violence, I mean that as a bit of a joke, but you need to use
your body,
your body.
Yeah.
Exactly. You need to release that energy.
Well, it's also funny because a lot of people see Aries as like a warrior as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which it is mythologically speaking.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's a lot of wisdom in that it's also the sign of Mars. But the difference is then there's a huge difference between having the moon and the sun in Aries. So in the moon, it has to do with also things you need to grow out of. And this is very important because remember what I said. The moon sign also represents your past. So what does that mean? Do you want to stay in your past all your life? The answer is no. You need to outgrow. So in a certain sense, if you want a very primitive, and this is very primitive, little key to simple astrology, look at the negative qualities in any sign. If you have the moon in that sign, these are qualities you need to be very aware of you, qualities you need to work on, qualities you need to get away with. Where the sun sign, the sign you're born in, is where you are heading, especially if you want to feel fulfilled.
All right.
Taurus is the next sign. What's interesting about astrology is that a sign is always a reaction to the sign before. So we have the hyperactive Aries sign is followed by a sign that much more has to do with being calm, that much more has to do with a stable environment, and is also a fairly conservative sign. Now, again, in the idiotic astrology, and it truly is idiotic, you will read that people born in Taurus are always conservative, don't want to do much, is waiting for other people to do stuff, and forget about that. Again, we need to go to what is that makes someone born in the sign of Taurus, which is, by the way, late April and until around May 21st, where Aries is from around 20th of April till 20th of May, but you can look that up. Suddenly it's about that, and it changes every year, but never within more than a day and a half. So in the sign of Taurus, that is actually people who need peace and comfort and a sense of belonging, but a belonging through having something. So the dark side of Taurus is actually being possessive, wanting more. I want more money. I want more beauty. But what the sign actually needs on a deeper level is values that are important. Now, values is not necessarily money, as you can read in a magazine about Taurus. It's not necessarily having a beautiful wife or husband. It's not necessarily about having a beautiful home. But it is a sign where if you don't have sound values, if you don't own, and I do mean that, if you don't own things that are important to you, if you don't have that connection to the material world, to nature, it can also be like having a garden and finding beauty in nature, then something is often missing in your life. People born in Taurus, no matter how wonderful hippies they are, no matter how free spirits they seem, that's actually not what makes them happy. And I can give you some examples that's funny. I've often found that a lot of people who are born Taurus actually are free spirits and actually are all over the place. But then you can make, and again, do remember, I'm generalizing like crazy. But then, if you are Taurus and you do that, and you also claim, and this I love, a lot of hippies who are born Taurus who would say, I'm not interested in the material world. Money means nothing to me. Look at them and look where the shadow side is. It means a lot to them, but it doesn't come out, so you have to hate. You have to hate the materialistic society. So you could argue, if you're born in the sign of Taurus, it doesn't mean that you love money, but you need to be at peace with the material world because your sign asks you to be grounded. The sign asks you to have a relationship to owning and having something. So if you're born with the moon in Taurus, then contrary to people who are born with a sense of stability, meaning their moon in Aries, moon in Taurus are people then who actually should have a beautiful home. If you know someone has the moon in Taurus and you walk into their home and it's a fucking mess, you actually know that those people are probably not very comfortable there. And trust me, some people are very comfortable with chaos. Not in Taurus. There is a sense of, I want stability at home. So if your moon is there, you in general want stability, you want beauty around you, you want a certain sense of order. Those things are just very important for people with that. Again, you won't know where your moon is if you never did your horoscope, or you won't know that. Maybe you can sit there and guess if that is a position that's yours, but anything I haven't covered around Taurus? Any questions about that? Or
no, I mean, I think that seems pretty explanatory on that side. Yeah, because Taurus, it's about what they value.
It's about what they value. It's actually a sign more than anything about inner values, not outer values. So again, a more primitive Taurus is extremely connected to the body. Taurus and Scorpio are the most sexual signs in the zodiac. So if you're Taurus with a Scorpio rising or moon, good luck. But they need that relationship. I wasn't judging them. You need to be connected to the so-called real world.
Yeah, makes sense.
So again, the next sign, Gemini, is then a reaction to the sign before. So now we have a sign that is a bit all over the place. We have a sign that's immensely curious. So what do you know about people who are born in Gemini? You know that they need variation. They need to travel. They need to be stimulated intellectually. The planet here is Mercury. Again, it has to do with all kind of traffic, the traffic in your brain, the traffic in your life. So if you meet an extremely calm Gemini who's not really interested in reading, who's never online, who hasn't traveled much, who will tell you, I'm not very curious, I just want to sit at home and stare at my partner, you're probably looking at a human tragedy. Because if you're born in that sign, you actually need the variation. However, what people get wrong, again, about astrology is people in Gemini don't necessarily need to talk much. They don't necessarily need to travel all the time. They don't have to be stewardesses or journalists, the same way that a Taurus is rarely a banker, even though everybody wants them to be a banker, right. or a real estate agent. Those are the kind of things you read, that an Aries should be a warrior or an athlete, or conquer something. There's a degree of truth to that, but your job doesn't have to reflect that.
Right.
So if you have your moon in Gemini, it actually means that you really need to work with being too restless. You really need to work with not being all over the place. But it also means that you do find security in living in a railway station, living in an airport. And obviously I mean that symbolically. I mean that those places where there is speed, where there's a lot of variation. Someone with a moon in Gemini need that. So again, what would a home look like? The perfect home for someone, and do remember what I said, not someone necessarily who's born in the sign of Gemini, but someone who has the moon the planet for stability and emotional security in Gemini. They need a place where they're stimulated. What would a parody of someone with a moon in Gemini be? They got 3 iPads, 5 iPhones, they're communicating with the whole world. They're doing it in a very shallow way. They don't really get into depth with anything, which is, by the way, the shadow sign of Gemini. It's
Shallow.
It's shallow. It's, the parody of a Gemini is someone who knows everything and actually doesn't know that much, because it's kind of like Wikipedia knowledge, that they have
just read or just heard or...
Yeah, and please, I'm not. I know, Silla gave me shit for mentioning Trump in another podcast of ours.
We're not doing this now.
No. He's a Gemini. And so am I, and so is Silla, who's sitting here. We're all Geminis, and so is PS, 1/12 of the population of the world. So the only thing you know about Gemini, that there's a strong need for communication, but not necessarily an outer communication. And that's what people get wrong. But it's people who know, who needs knowledge, who needs variation.
Yeah.
How much time is left?
13 minutes.
Okay, so we are moving on to the next sign, and again, the reaction to Cancer, which starts around the June 21st. That sign, if you're born under Cancer, what do you know 100% about those people? And again, you actually only know one thing. Please don't think you know and can describe their full personality. You cannot. No one can, no matter how brilliant you think you are, because astrology doesn't work that way. But people who are born in Cancer have one thing in common, every single of them, if they want to be the person they are meant to be. And that is, they need a strong sense of emotional belonging. That's why if you read about the sun sign Cancer, it's often connected to the home, which makes people think that if you're born Cancer, you have to love your background, you have to love your mom and dad. All of this, of course, is bullshit. You don't have to. But in order to be happy, even if you're the most restless Cancer, even if you're a Cancer who has been in all 240 countries in the world, even if you have conquered everything in the world and have all the qualities in your personality that no one would connect with Cancer, you still know one thing about them. Those people will never be happy if they don't have a place they belong. Now, do you understand that belonging doesn't have to be the family you were born into? It might be a family you create yourself. And Cancer, interestingly enough, is also the sign for patriotism, for being extremely nationalist and patriotic about where you're born. And that's neither good nor bad. We obviously know what's good and bad about being a patriot. Interestingly enough, also America, the US, is born under the sign of Cancer. It's a very patriotic country. And so are a lot of other countries in the world, of course. But this is kind of the key that I have met some of the most restless people who want to explore everything are born under the sign of Cancer. But to an astrology, that's not surprising, because any kind of personality can be born in a sign. But just watch them. Look at, those are the kind of people who then, get a child very late in their life, or maybe a 65-year-old find happiness because they found a family. It's so important. But we're talking about the emotional belonging. If you have your moon in Cancer, again, that has to do with your emotional life, how you find security, how you get that sense if things are not going your way, what do you need to do? Then you actually should look at your moon sign. So someone who's in trouble, who has a moon in Cancer. And again, let me repeat, if you never had your horoscope done or you haven't looked it up, you don't know where your moon is. But moon in Cancer basically shows a person who has to go home when they feel bad. Again, it doesn't necessarily have to be to your childhood home, but this is a sign of nostalgia. These are people who are connected to the history. And you will also find that people who have a moon in Cancer are often extremely interested in history of all kinds. Their country's history in general, they are connected to the past. In a sense, more than people with the sun in Cancer, meaning the people who are born under the sign Cancer. So the moon in Cancer is usually conservative. If things are going bad in their life, they need actually to disconnect themselves from everybody they don't know well, from everybody they don't trust. Because Cancer is a very emotional sign. It's a very sensitive sign. So it's also people, especially with moon in Cancer, who need to stay at home where they don't feel good. Not go out. Remember I said in the beginning that people with the moon in Aries actually need to get rid of that steam. They need to be active. They need to get their body going.
Yeah, where that the moon in Cancer, it being its home sign, is at home being at home.
Yeah, because it's exactly, and we don't want to make this too advanced, but the planet that rules, that belongs to the sign of Cancer is the moon.
Yeah.
So that is really people who need that connection to their past.
Obviously, home is very important to a Cancer.
Especially moon in Cancer.
Yeah.
Actually, more than sun in Cancer.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So then the next sign, again, is a reaction to the fairly quiet, at least in theory, of Cancer. Then the sun in Leo is again someone who needs to shine. And actually Leo is the sign of the sun. So that's why that people with the sun in Leo has a reputation for big ego. It's not necessarily true. Please forget all about those generalizations. You can have someone with a sun in Cancer, meaning born in Cancer, being born in Pisces, whose egos are much, much bigger. But the reason why Leo has a reputation for that, and also be the sign of the kings through history, the sun in Leo shows someone who needs to shine through something they manifest. That can be a small business. It can be kids. They need to shine through something they have done and accomplished. So the saddest people in the world, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, I'm simply trying to explain the psychology in this sign. If you're born under the sign of Leo, you simply need to be proud of something you have accomplished. However, it doesn't have to be something that's great in other people's eyes. So a mother who is incredibly proud of her 3 kids is actually typical Leo. Someone who obviously is a king and behaves like a monarch is also in a certain sense a typical Leo. But again, you cannot make that ridiculous argument that everybody in Leo is egotistical and want things their own way. However, it is the shadow side of Leo without a single doubt. So the moon in Leo, again, those people who have a moon in their personal horoscope in the sign of Leo are then people, when they are not feeling good, then we return to our past and we kind of try to protect ourselves. So when you don't feel good and you have your moon in Leo, you need to work on the shadow signs of the sign. I've said that to most signs already, not all of them though. But you actually need to go to all the so-called negative qualities in Leo. You have to work on not being too egotistical. It is the sign of narcissism, Again, it doesn't mean that Leos are more narcissists than others, and that's what people get wrong. But you actually need to work on that side that only thinks of yourself. And when you feel bad, you simply need to do something that makes you proud. You simply need to do something physically that make you feel that you have accomplished something in this world. And I'm serious, whether that is just building a shed in your garden, or whether that is just doing something for other people so you feel good about yourself, that is actually immensely important for someone with a moon in Leo.
So they have to be proud of what they accomplished in some way or another.
Excellent. It's the sign of proud. And I also kind of laugh at Americans when I came over, because you in your language use that all the time. I'm proud to serve Starbucks coffee. A sign like that made me roar with laughter in the beginning. I'm proud. People use that a lot here. And in a certain sense, that's good, because we need to find the pride in things we do.
Yeah, healthy pride, obviously.
Healthy pride, exactly. So the last sign...
Should we continue? We only have 4 minutes. Maybe we should...
No, we have to. I mean, we have to. That's the 6th sign. And
Okay.
Poor Virgo. It's funny because sometimes there's a tiny tendency of being a victim in Virgo. So that is what we get to now. But the sign of Virgo is often quite misunderstood, because this is a sign that needs purity. Purity means a lot of different things. So one of the things Virgos are accused of is of being anal, of loving systems. But actually that's not necessarily the case. It's a sign that needs purity. Remember, Virgo is a virgin. It doesn't mean you can be a slut in that sign as much as you can be a slut in any sign. But in order to feel good, you need a sense of purity. But that purity is, strangely enough, also understanding the world, categorizing the world. It's actually an intellectual sign, even though it's not in the intellectual element. It's in the element of earth, which has to do with grounding. So these are people who need to use their intellectual knowledge in a practical way. Like Gemini is an intellectual sign that actually has knowledge for the sake of knowledge. Gemini is the sign of useless trivia. All the kind of information you don't need. In the sign of Virgo, it's practical. So anyone who is born in the sign of Virgo is actually in one way or another seeking purity. Is seeking a knowledge that can be used practically to accomplish something on planet Earth. Now, if you have your moon in the sign of Virgo, you need a sense of order. All kinds of order. All kinds of systems and order. So people who have the moon in Virgo and don't feel good about themselves actually are the ones who need to clean their house. They're actually the one who needs to go in therapy to clean themselves. They're the ones who need purity, who need spas, who need healing, and actually will really accomplish that. Virgo, will really be fulfilled by doing that. So this is also why Virgo is the sign of health. Virgo is the sign of working with yourself. Yoga has a lot to do with the sign of Virgo as well. So anyone with the moon in that sign who needs to feel better, and we are talking about the moon in Virgo now, need to do that. Virgo is also a sign of being organized. And as you can tell, I don't have a lot of Virgo in my horoscope. I don't have a lot of Earth in my horoscope. So that's why we have to stop now, even though I would have liked to talk more about this.
Well, don't worry. We're going to continue this series. So, of course, we stopped at Virgo, but I will continue this series with Peter. So just look out for our next podcast in this series, okay? All right, tune in till next time, and I think this has been a wonderful talk. So we're wrapping it up now because I literally have about 10 seconds. Love you guys. Talk to you guys all later. The next series of this podcast.
Take care, all of you. Bye-bye.